The 15-Point Plan is part of the Win, Make, Give podcast network.
Welcome to another episode of the 15-Point Plan podcast. My name is Ryan Greigg, and as always, I am here with my amazing co-host, Jacqueline Smith. And today we're jumping into not a one episode, Jacqueline, but we got a two-part episode that I am super excited to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about longevity and how we can live the longest and healthiest life possible. Not only a long lifespan, but as I love to hear, a long health span. Jacqueline, I'm excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, Ryan reached out and he's just kind of on this deep dive into this topic, and we got to talking, and I've got a lot of thoughts whirling around in my head too, just about my own family and some of the things I've seen in terms of habits and traits and whatnot. So I'm excited to have this conversation and learn.
As am I, Jacqueline. And so this is something that I've been studying for, a few years, because I do believe I want to live. My goal is to live to be 100. There's just too many beautiful things in this world, too many things to see, too many family members that aren't even maybe in this world yet. For example, my son's kids and maybe their grandkids. My grandmother lived to be about 94, and I want to live a little bit longer than that. And so what we're going to talk about today is something that's found in the world called the blue zones. And we're going to talk about some of the things that have allowed people to live to be over 100. These blue zones are the areas of the world where they have the highest concentration of what they call centenarians, people that have lived to be over 100 years old. Those 5 places in the world, Jacqueline, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Icaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and the last one, I don't think anybody would ever guess this. I don't even know where this is. Loma Linda, California.
So weird. But honestly, I wouldn't have guessed any of them. So there's that.
Yeah. And as we hear a couple of the common themes through this 2-part episode, it'll connect a little bit to these places. But those are the 5 areas of the world that have the highest concentration. So there's been a couple studies done on those areas specifically and what those people do to have a long life. In fact, the longest life of up to 100 years. So in this 2-part episode, we're going to dive deeply into the blue zones of the world and what they do. Then this next episode, it's going to be a little controversial, because I've been studying this gentleman named Brian Johnson, and his whole goal in life is to not die. And he has created this company called Blueprint, and he is anti-aging himself at a more rapid rate than anybody has ever seen. So that's going to come on the next episode. But first, we're going to talk about these places called the blue zones and the 4 things that the blue zones have that they have found as the most common themes that increase that longevity, so the longer lifespan, but as we also say, a long health span, meaning you live a long life, but you live a long life where you're active and healthy. Yeah. So I'm excited for this, Jacqueline. What goes through your mind, though, when you think about maybe longevity or living to be 100 years old? Is that something you want to do? Is that...
I mean, as long as like you just touched on it, that's what was going through my head is I don't want to just live long if I'm not living a good life, right? So I think that when we're talking about longevity, we're not just talking about extending our time here, but extending the time that we have to enjoy, like you said, the good things in life, not just extend the time that we're around and maybe even a burden to our families in some ways, right? So we want to live long and healthy lives. And I think that's, where the 15-point plan comes in, because the habits that we are talking about with the 15-point plan, you'll see a lot of parallels here when we talk through these. So what are the 4 things, Ryan? Let's dive in.
Absolutely. So the goal is, how can we tie this into the 15-point plan? So I'm going to go through these. There's going to be 4 in this episode, and there's going to be 5 in the next episode. So number 1 is activity, right? The blue zones of the world, the people that are living to be 100, they're active. But this is super interesting, Jacqueline. When they look at that activity, they say in quotes, to move naturally.
So not these rigorous, like HIIT hard workouts that we, you know, maybe think that we have to do in order to be fit and live a long, healthy life, but just actually moving, which is funny because the point on the 15-point plan, it says movement. It doesn't say work until you want to throw up.
That's right.
you know so it's interesting that movement piece, it could be stretching, it could be walking, I mean moving naturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Using maybe some mobility exercises that help us maintain that mobility in our joints and our muscles. And I think I've definitely thought, oh my gosh, I've got to work out. I remember meeting with a trainer at one point when I was transitioning from, and some of you will relate to this, being a cardio queen, right? Where you feel like you have to do like hours and hours of cardio on the stair
Yeah.
climber, on the treadmill, on the elliptical. And I remember going to work out, and it was strength, we moved into strength training and mobility. And I kind of felt a little bit like, wait, that was the workout? Because I was so used to like dying on the stair climber for however long.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so these areas, for example, in Okinawa, Japan, you'll see these, and I've watched some of these videos, 75, 80-year-old people. Their movement is simply that they walk to their work. It's a mile away. And on that walk, they're doing things like some pull-ups. They're doing things like some body weight type stuff. So they're not overdoing it. And I thought I loved that because it kind of gave
Yeah.
me a little permission to go a little easier on myself. Now, don't get me wrong. I love those HIIT workouts. But I'm learning actually the difference of like bodybuilding and HIIT workouts and how that might impact your longevity in life.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So number one is just activity and moving naturally, moving normally and naturally. Number two, in these blue zones of the world, is to have a positive outlook.
Mm-hmm.
It's to have a purpose. They say have the ability to downshift, meaning maybe that's meditation or mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And having a purpose in life. Maybe that's seeing your grandkids graduate. How many stories have we heard of people that maybe get stage 4 cancer, but they say, you know what? The doctor told me I got 6 months, but my kid's going to graduate and get married in 5 years. I'm not giving up. And they make it because they have that purpose.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, the positive outlook is much easier to have when you have done the first thing, which is the activity. I know, like for me, if I go too many days, and I don't get my movement in, I do have a harder time keeping a positive perspective and even focusing on my purpose, because I just get like grumbly and grouchy and focused on all the negative. And so maybe not everyone's like that, impacted by it, but I know for me, I'm much more positive when I get my movement in. It gets those positive, hormones, the endorphins and everything going in your body. And then you can have a positive outlook. A
Yeah.
lot easier.
And I love how you mentioned that these start to stack because they so much do. I agree. I feel better when I hit that activity. My mindset is better.
Yeah.
I feel better. And then that goes into step number 3. And they say to eat wise.
Mm-hmm.
They say to eat wisely. These areas of the world, they're not eating like the average American, which is just more quantity.
Yeah.
But they say these areas are mostly plant-based. They're eating a little bit of meat or a little bit of fish, but they're a mostly plant-based diet, which is a similar theme we'll see in part 2 of this. And that makes me think, and what they say in Japan, for example, again, they say eat till you're 80% full. Never eat until you're full. Holidays are coming up, or maybe they've already happened, depending on where you're at. Now, we've talked about that in the previous episode, balance. Maybe you eat all you can on 1 or 2 days, but for the longevity of our life, if we want to live a longest life possible, we want to eat wisely, as they said. So checking that point on nutrition, checking that point on your water, checking that point on what you're eating, and just making sure that I love that word, eating wisely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, the last one, Jacqueline, this one, it's going to be also a common theme. And this one is going to be a little controversial as well, because they talk about drinking. They talk about drinking alcohol. And they talk about connection. So the fourth one is connection and having that connection. Mm-hmm. And they say a glass of wine is okay. during that connection. Now, overconsumption of alcohol will absolutely have reverse effects on anti-aging. But many of these areas, and you've seen this, you look at the people in Italy, right? Sardinia, Italy. You see that 90-year-old grandmother enjoying that glass of red wine. And they talk about maybe one glass of red wine a week and what that can do for the reduction of your stress level. So they actually say that connection, step number 4, being around your loved ones, having a sense of belonging, and even during that time, you're eating wisely, and you could include a glass of red wine. Mm-hmm. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, I kind of feel like there's a bit of a movement going on with alcohol and people. There's a lot of people. There's even this phrase that I've been hearing a lot more lately, sober curious.
Ooh.
People are becoming curious about, their alcohol, their relationship with alcohol, and is it really, as harmless as maybe it's been portrayed in media and whatnot over the years. And I think there's a lot of studies happening right now. And you're right, there's a little bit of controversy because I've heard studies that say, it's fine to have it in limited quantities. But I think just like our definition of quantity with food is a little skewed maybe here on our continent, I think that same thing with alcohol. They're not talking about a bottle of wine once a week, right? And maybe it's not even like the glass of wine that we pour in our neck of the woods, right? So it's like, I mean, I think that the thing here is like knowing yourself and making sure that you're making wise choices. And, we're not here to say, drink a glass of wine a week or not drink a glass of wine a week, but this is just like one study. And it's interesting to me. The connection piece makes total sense because I think right now, I was just listening to another podcast earlier this morning, and it was talking about how loneliness is like an epidemic right now. Like we're more connected than ever, but people are more lonely than ever. And just because we're kind of living on this surface level. And so think about like connection with family. You might be around family and friends a lot, but are you really connecting with them? Or is it just like, hi, how are you? I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, now let's gossip and talk about all the things that we don't like about our life. Or, you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing during that time? Are you truly connecting with people throughout your day? Or are you just on the surface going through the motions?
And that's so true. Having that connection, having that purpose, having that drive. How many people do we know whose parents get older and the mother passes away, and just a couple months later, the father passes away because they've lost that purpose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in looking at these studies, these are studies that they've been looking at for decades now. The blue zones of the earth. Again, there's 4 things that we talked about. And I'm excited to jump into this next episode because we're going to talk about some similar things, but also some different things. And this is the new cutting edge science on longevity from a guy named Brian Johnson. So this is part 1. If you're curious about the blue zones, go Google it. There's some really cool images. It'll talk about the different places, but those images I really love because it breaks down exactly what we talked about. So as always, make sure that you're sharing this episode with somebody that might get impact from it. Make sure to check our other podcasts at winmakegive.com. Follow Jacqueline and I on Instagram and social media, Jacqueline Ray Smith and Ryan Park Greigg. And until next time, we hope you enjoyed listening, and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.